now, here's today's host, Dr. Monika Buerger.
Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. Hopefully 2019 is bringing awesome things your way. Welcome to ChiroSecure's Look to the Children, a phenomenal show for chiropractors sharing chiropractic to other chiropractors and how we can make a difference in the lives of children. And today, I'm your host, by the way. I'm Dr. Monika Buerger from Intersect for Life. And I have an amazing guest today, Dr. Drew Rubin. Hey, Drew.
Hey, Monika. How are you?
I'm fabulous. Thanks for joining us. So before we get started, is it okay if I give the audience a little bit of a brag sheet on how awesome you are?
Sure, go ahead.
So Drew has been in private practice since 1989. He has been an instructor at Life University since 2001. He teaches pediatric diagnostics and 3 elective courses. He has a diplomat, I think, in sports and a diplomat in from the ICPA in Pediatrics, and he's actually a speaker of ICPA for several years now, and an awesome organization, by the way, with a great program. I myself was honored to be a part of that program for over a decade, and actually was able to bring to the forefront what a lot of the stuff that Drew and I are going to talk about today in regards to sensory motor development, neurosensory integration, and primitive reflexes. So it's awesome to have Drew taken that torch over for the ICPA. He has an amazing practice in Atlanta metro area, specializes with a lot of ADD, ADHD, autism, latch issues. Unfortunately, the things we're seeing more and more in our paradigm today in practice. So we're gonna talk on that. He's published like 7 articles for pediatric research journals. He has 3 novels that I want him to share a little bit of information about. One is called The Adjustment, one is called The Acceptance, and one is It's a Small World. So I'm really excited to hear about that, a little bit about those. And he has a podcast called ChiroCast that has over 160,000 downloads. So man is amazing. So Drew, thank you for taking time to hang out with us.
It's such a pleasure to be with you guys. Anything for ChiroSecure and to hang out with you, this is a great thing.
Well, we really appreciate it. I know you're super, super busy, but I was super excited to have you on the team. So tell me a little bit about these novels.
Well, back in the late 90s, I had this inspiration. I was driving home one day, and all of a sudden, the thought hit me, what happens if the whole world had to get adjusted? Not like they should get adjusted, but they had to get adjusted. Something occurred where all of a sudden everybody aligns with chiropractic. So that's where this book came from, The Adjustment. And then the other 2 books were kind of similar, kind of sequels riding off of that. They're available on Kindle for download. And it was just a wild ride. I've always been a writer. Like, I write research articles, and this was just sort of another fun thing to do, to write some novels.
Well, we definitely need to download those. And wouldn't it be an amazing world that we would live in if everybody had to be adjusted?
Wouldn't it be awesome?
We could we can strive for that. And you know what? Forgive me, but I left out a very important milestone for you. You also wrote a chapter in the awesome pediatric chiropractic textbook by Dr. Onrigan Plogger. So
yes,
you want to recognize that as well.
Yes.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
How did you get into chiropractic, and specifically pediatric chiropractic? I know you have.
I've got a great story.
And I know you have. You had an amazing mentor, Dr. Larry Webster, and what more could you have than that, right?
Well, he was Dr. Webster was my teacher at Life University back in the 80s, and was very inspirational for me. But honestly, my first passion was hockey. I want to be a hockey chiropractor because I've been playing hockey ever since I was a little munchkin. But then Dr. Webster and we kept in touch over the years. And he saw me in 1995 at a seminar, one of his early ICPA seminars. And he said, Drew, this sports thing is not working for you. I really think you should get more into pediatrics. And I don't know what he did to me at that particular time, but he made me do an about face. And next thing you know, I'm like headlong into pediatrics. And that's how I got started. So I blame all this on Dr. Webster.
Well, that's a pretty good thing to pay tribute to it and to blame on, huh?
And what's amazing now is like I'm sitting at Life University as we speak, and I am teaching the class he taught me.
Right.
So it totally blows me away every time I even think about that I'm standing somehow or other in his amazing footsteps.
And that's amazing. And you're doing an amazing job with that. I've met some of in fact, I came out there a few years ago and we did a little fundraising seminar for the Peds Club out there. And you have an amazing group. So kudos to you. Thanks for doing that, actually.
Thank you.
Passing the bar on, So is there, we've seen the tide rolling, unfortunately, and the tide changing. Now we have 1 in 40-ish kiddos said to be on the autism spectrum. Is there anything you particularly are more fired up about in today's paradigm that we're seeing in our practices?
Well, one of the things that Dr. Webster told me in that 1995 little meeting that we had was there's a lot more kids with autism than ever before. There's a lot more kids with ADHD than ever before, and we need more pediatric chiropractors taking care of these kids. And I didn't realize how like he kind of knew. He must have had a crystal ball in his brain to know that the wave was coming, because back in the 90s, it really wasn't as big a thing, but he started seeing it. And then shortly after, he told me that I read this paper, Movement Analysis in Infancy May be Useful for Early Diagnosis of Autism, which for me was one of the most pivotal papers I've ever read, because it showed me, even though I know it's a 1998 paper, it's kind of dated, but it was like the grandfather of autism doesn't come when it's diagnosed at 3 years old or 4 or 5 years old. Autism gives signs years and years beforehand. And one of the biggest signs is a movement issue in the child, where they're having trouble rolling, trouble walking, trouble crawling, trouble sitting, even trouble nursing. Any of these kind of things can all roll into what they should be is like warning signs saying, okay, something's going on with this baby's brain, and we need to look at this now, instead of what they all say is, oh, don't worry about it. Let's just put a bottle in the kid. Oh, he'll crawl eventually. Oh, he'll talk eventually.
He'll grow out of it.
Right. They'll grow out of it. The sister does the talking for him. All these other kind of things that I keep on hearing. But that paper really kind of showed me, wow, I need to look not at the 3-year-old kid who's already been diagnosed, but at the children before they're diagnosed, and see if we can get their brains like turned back on.
Absolutely. I just taught a class Tuesday morning for our Intersect for Life doctors. And this is really one thing that I'm trying to really hound into their brains, and part of our I call it our early intervention. Actually, now I say before the horses left the barn, we have issues. We really need to go. We know that most labels that get put upon a person, whether it's diabetes or autoimmune or cancer or whatever, it begins 20 years before that label gets put upon them. Mm-hmm. So if we have the average woman pregnant at the first pregnancy at age 24, we need to start working with them at age 20. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So the other thing is what is truly early intervention, not that we know it in our school systems today, and that is looking at some of these patterns. Even visual tracking and looking at some of these patterns, and that is telling you there is a functional brain deficit. Mm-hmm. And we know that all has to do with the amygdala and the frontal cortex, and left not addressed. Those are the things that keep us programmed in that fear paralysis paradigm, and then later leads to mental health and neurodevelopmental issues. So you're right on track there. Right.
When I like talking to the students and telling them, or the docs at the ICPA seminars, that we have to see the babies on the floor. So many times babies come in, they're in arms or in a car seat, and we need to see the babies on the floor and watch them interact with the world, because that's when you're not going to really necessarily pick up these movement pattern issues when they're sitting in mommy's arms. But if they're on the floor, you're going to watch them roll incorrectly. You're going to watch them crawl funny. You're going to watch them having difficulties, navigating in their world and having trouble, like where their own spaces, vestibular, proprioceptive issues, etc. You won't see that in mommy's arms. So it's so critical.
Bucket.
Exactly. I hate those car seat things. Like car seats are called car seats because they're for cars. And so I think that's a super important thing to understand, that we need to watch the kids in their natural environment and not artificially in a bucket or in mommy's arms.
Yeah, great tip for those docs out there, especially those young practitioners, those newer practitioners. And I love Teitelbaum's. I address that in a lot of my classes. So let's bat that around a little bit, because one of the things that you and I are both, we talk about primitive reflexes, we talk about movement milestones. So in the paper, he talks about the corkscrew roll. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a lot of making sure that the rolling pattern is going to also integrate the spinal galant reflex. Right. So what are some of the things you see with your little fiddle farts? And what are some tips you give to the parents?
One of the most important things that we see with our children who are having like rolling problems or crawling problems is, once again, like you said, the corkscrew thing, I like calling contradictory rolling. So in other words, one part of their body goes this way and part of their body goes this way, so they can't put it together. Another thing I see is a lack of protective reflex. So if we have a kid who's, let's say, 8, 9, 10 months old, I'll put them on a physio ball and I will roll them forwards and backwards. And a lot of these kids who are having rolling problems or crawling problems or walking problems, they will not put their hands out in front when they're going forward, and they won't kick their feet out in back when they're going backwards. So we teach the parents to do exercises to help integrate and get that reflex kicked in, so that now we'll see these kids, the moms will say, yeah, I'm rolling him forwards and backwards, and now his hands are coming out and his legs are kicking out. And that will help kind of kickstart their ability to roll or crawl or et cetera.
Right. And we can clarify that a little bit, because we do want this to be a teaching moment for the docs out there. That is called the protective extension reflex. And Teitelbaum talks about that in that paper in regards to when the child first starts sitting at 6 months of age. When they start to topple over forward, they should put their hands out to break their fall. And then we have different stages, sideways, about 8 to 10 months, and backwards about 10 to 12 months. So we do want to see that there. Have you found, I want to ask you this, because I found that we do want to see that reflex. It's more of a postural reflex that we want to develop. I find that if that is not developed, that the startle reflex tends to stay active. Do you find that?
Yes, we'll find that the Mar reflex and also the asymmetric tonic neck reflex seems to stay positive in those kids as well. Right.
Oh, this is so fun. We're just on the same page of
it. Same wavelength.
Same wavelength, yeah. And if they don't do that, you said contralateral or contradictory roll. I always call it the corkscrew roll.
The corkscrew is good. I like that, but I've called it the contradictory, because one part of them is going one way and one part's going another way.
Yeah. And that spinal galant, we know, is essential for, if that stays active, then we can get this chronic enuresis past the age of 5.
Absolutely.
And also gut dysbiosis. And those are some of the things we're seeing in these neurodevelopmental challenged children is chronic gut issues. I don't know if you're seeing that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Leaky gut is rampant in these kids. And what we've been seeing a lot of lately is kids who are having these issues because of Lyme disease, because of pandas. So it's not, sometimes these kids are developing neurotypically, and then they'll have this incident, getting Lyme disease or getting a bad strep infection that turns into pandas. So you'll see these kids kind of revert into these other sort of behaviors, but we're seeing the same kind of thing. Their guts just fall apart with that.
Yeah. And when I started teaching this work with the ICPA over 15 years ago, I always said that we would see, we're talking in a pediatric paradigm, but I always said, we're going to see this in an adult paradigm, and then, more and more. Are you seeing, we used to talk about integrating these primitive reflexes, but now that's getting harder and harder to do, because these guys can be reactivated during any stressors. And because, so I think this is a good point, maybe, that we could hit home to those practitioners out there that are frustrated, because lots of times I think it's that they think that they're doing something wrong because they can't get these reflexes under control. But the problem is in today's society, there's so many stressors on the individual, especially the little fiddle farts, that those reemerge. Are you seeing that as well?
Yes, and we're seeing incidents of reemergence of primitive reflexes with depression, with anxiety, with concussions.
Yes.
So very interesting where you see a kid, we had a kid recently who was a wrestler, and the kid was just a strong, stocky kid, and he had a concussion, and it was unbelievable the change. And what was amazing is he looked like a child with high functioning autism, where
Right.
he was unable to control himself. His gut was a disaster. He was very, very emotional. And the father was like, who is this kid? This isn't my son. My son was the tough wrestler, and now he's just completely different. So we're seeing this, in so many different places. And either way, we still have to try to get these reflexes, reintegrated. It's just a matter of, were they retained all along, or did they all of a sudden come back on? I like using the analogy of like a phone volume. If the phone volume goes down to 0, it doesn't mean that the volume is gone. It just means it's muted. But if an injury or impact or something happens, now the volume can go back up again. So it goes from being muted to not muted anymore.
Great analogy. Love that one.
Thanks.
Love it. What about any other literature out there? I know you're kind of nerdy like myself, and but it's good, right? We're good nerds, right?
This is good nerd.
Any other pearls of papers that I know you were diving into a couple cool things. What else you got for us?
Well, another one of my favorite papers is another oldie but a goodie from 2005 is manual therapy from Biederman, who later on wrote the book Manual Therapy in Children.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite takeaways from that particular book is the concept of verticalization. And what Dr. Biederman, he's an osteopath from Germany, what he talks about is like the whole point of the first year is to go from horizontal to vertical. Like that's the whole point of what the brain does, is horizontal to vertical. But so many kids have so many problems with that verticalization. And the more problems you have in that first year of verticalization, his postulate is that the more problems you have becoming verticalized, the more problems you're going to have later on with behavioral issues, social issues, etc.
Which makes sense, which totally makes sense, because that is too, becoming vertical, tons of vestibular and proprioceptive input needed there.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that those are key critical sensory systems for not getting stuck in that, what I call limbic lock and load mode,
right,
and allowing that prefrontal cortex to do its job. So
exactly.
Great papers. Would you mind, once this gets recorded, perhaps if you see if get tagged in this, maybe you can put those papers
sure,
for reference for
I'll put links to the papers. Absolutely.
That's great. So what do you see? This is a loaded question.
Okay.
What do you see as one of the biggest challenges in a pediatric practice today? Maybe in regards to parents, to getting them to comply, to getting them to understand. What you got for us?
I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing today is parents not really taking the primitive reflex exercises or eye exercises or postural exercises as seriously as they really ought to. And understanding that babies need, like we talked about before, this car seat thing, babies either be in arms or on the ground. And so many of them are kept in car seats or these boxes, cages, as you call them, instead of experiencing the world, right? So Dr. Glenn Dolman, who wrote the book, What to Do About Your Brain and Your Child, always said that the work of a child should be face down on the floor, as long as they are able to do that. Because they need to get proprioceptive, input into their front of their bodies, and not sitting in a car seat where all the proprioceptive input is in the back of their bodies. So I think that's a critical thing to explain to parents, that we need to get them to we have to get them to do work, and the more significant the problem, the more work the parent needs to do with the child. So a lot of times parents say, "Here's my kid, fix him, and I'll bring him," and you're going to do all the work, and I'll do as much as I can, but they have to participate. It's just like brushing your teeth. You can't just wait for the dentist, cleaning once every 6 months to clean your teeth. You got to do it on a regular basis to make it really work.
Right, right. I always say in my practice, it's the parent, the patient, and the physician. It's a tag team.
Hmm.
If the patient's the child, then the parents have to be on board too.
Right.
And you're right. In today's world, I think they want to, they want the quick fix. They want the magic bullet, and we know. So, would you say education's a big piece of what you do with?
Oh, it's everything. Chiropractic is a science, art, and philosophy that nobody hears about ever, except when they're in your office or maybe looking at your Facebook posts or whatever. So we have to. It's our responsibility as chiropractors and students to make sure that we're constantly educating them, pouring chiropractic into them, pouring the importance of neurology into them, neuroplasticity into them, so that they understand that there's a like we had 2 new patients yesterday, both of them kids, both of them on the spectrum. And after I did my chiropractic and functional neurological examination on them, both parents said the same thing. And I'm sure you've heard it a bazillion times also. I have been to 1,000 neurologists and 1,000 pediatricians, and nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever explained this to me before. I've never seen anything like this before. And to me, that's like the ultimate compliment, because I love doing stuff that nobody else does.
And that's a great point, because one of the things that all of us, I think, that are out there speaking and lecturing and teaching on this is because chiropractic it is becoming a entry point for so many parents that have children that are struggling. That we be aware, though, of being able to detect some of these changes or these patterns, like you said, and understand, and even if we can intervene as early as possible to change that trajectory of time. So it's really important that chiropractors now, whether you want to specialize in pediatrics or not, being able to see, to note, to pick up if something's a little askew is going to be invaluable.
Right. I think that's our main function we can't wait for a label. We can't wait for the mom to say, I think something's going on. We have to be able to look ourselves and say, I'm watching that child. I'm seeing the child isn't crawling right. Maybe we should take a look at them. I think that's a huge part of what we do.
Yeah. And one thing I use, and I love this because we can give little different ideas of how we talk to parents. Just the other day, I said the value of the eye exercises, and I said, what is making his eyes move? And she looked at me and I go, it's his brain. So we're not doing eye exercises here. We're doing brain exercises. Mm-hmm. And she just was like, I never thought of it like that.
Right.
I never thought that. And it was like a light bulb moment. So I think those little nuances, those little pearls we can give parents, it just that follow through, that understanding, it's much more valuable to them.
Yeah. It's not a body exercise or an eye exercise. It's a brain exercise. Absolutely.
Yeah. And most parents want their child's brains to be healthy, because so many of them are afraid of the A word, the autism or ADHD word, or so forth. So I think, again, this is where early intervention, that we're chiropractors need to be on the forefront of early intervention.
Absolutely.
Right? Who's going to do it? Yeah. And who's going to remove that nervous system interference? No other than like a chiropractor.
Right. Exactly.
So what are any other last minute pearls you want to, because you've got so much in that brain of yours.
Yeah. Well, I think that the most important thing that we have to strive for is to make sure we keep on educating our parents and educating ourselves. So I never would have found, these sort of articles if it wasn't for just constantly scouring the research. So we need to educate our parents, but we need to educate our parents by educating ourselves first. And, we can't rely on just waiting to hear something at a fall CE seminar once a year. We need to be, if you're a pediatric chiropractor, we need to be on top of things. And I think that's a critical thing. Education doesn't end when you graduate. It continues.
It starts.
That's right. That's good. It starts when you graduate. You're right.
And thank you for saying that, because that is such a huge, important piece to the puzzle. I think if we use an analogy like other fields, that we get frustrated with, right? We get frustrated when a patient comes to us and says, well, the med doctor or what, I don't want to label any doctors, but where it's just the standard, here's your prescription, because that's what they're comfortable with. It's easy to get out and practice and do that, not have to take, you're busy and practice, you're tired when you get home, you have families and everything. but it is really that continually educating yourself, and that kind of keeps the fire going a little bit too, doesn't
Exactly.
it?
Exactly. When I keep on, every new article I read just gets me like fired up, and nothing I want to share, and I put it on Facebook or something. I talk to students about it. So there's nothing like education.
Right. And we thank you for that, because that's what we need on the forefront to really make the changes. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. We could go on for days probably.
Oh, yeah. Right? Thank you, Monika. This was really a blessing. I love what you are doing. I love ChiroSecure. I think both your organization and ChiroSecure are best out there.
Well, I appreciate it. And you're on the forefront too. And the changes you've made to society and the world are cannot go unrecognized. So really thank you.
Thank you.
For being you and taking that torch. And Larry is looking at you, smiling, going, right on.
I hope so. I hope so. Living in his legacy. I hope so.
I'm sure he is. So
thank you.
You have an amazing rest of the day. And those students from LifeU that are out, maybe listening to this or listening to this later, you have gold in your hands. So tap this man's brain out as best as you can, as much as you can.
Thanks, Monika. Have a great day.
Hey, you do the same. And everybody out there, thanks for joining another version of Look to the Children. I'm Dr. Monika Buerger from Intersect for Life. And again, thank you for being a part of a world where we're really out there to make change. Be sure to listen to the amazing Tony Ebel the first Thursday in February. He's going to drop some knowledge bombs your way. And thank you, ChiroSecure, for giving us the platform to get out there and make the changes. We appreciate your support.
Today's Pediatric show, Look to the Children, was brought to you by ChiroSecure and the award-winning book series, I Am a Lovable Me. Make sure you join us next week, right here at the same time. See you next week.